Hey everybody. So in this video, we have a lot to talk about in regards to guidelines, COVID safety protocols, and I brought two amazing guests, my good friends. I brought George, DisneyFamilyMan23 and VashSky on to discuss this with me today. George, Disney Family Man, if you can go ahead and introduce yourself and let everyone know where they can find you on social media, please.
Absolutely. Well, as Orange Grove just said, I'm George. I'm also known as DisneyFamilyMan23. You can find me there on YouTube. You could also follow me on Twitter at DisneyGeorge. And I'm also part of the Grand Circle Tour podcast. So you could definitely check us out on iTunes and even on YouTube. You can listen in as well.
Perfect. And Mr. VashSky, long time no see, buddy.
Yeah, long time no see. It's been forever. I can't. We just had to come on.
Yeah, it feels like just a few days ago. I mean, it's crazy.
It's just feels like yesterday. I was just on. No.
And if you can give everyone, if you can introduce yourself and then just let everyone know where they can find you on social media, that'd be great.
VashSky. It's easy. Dre. You can find me on Twitter. Best way at VashSky. That's at V as in Victor, ASHSKY. Best place to find me.
Perfect. So we're going to start off. Mr. Disney Family Man 23, George, has just gotten back from a trip at Walt Disney World. And he experienced a lot of the Disney protocols in regards to COVID-19. So George, if you can kind of get into that for us a little bit so we can talk about that. What did you notice over there in Orlando?
Absolutely. Believe it or not, after the fact I got back from my trip, I always do a trip report for the Grand Circle Tour podcast. And with the trip reports, we always talk about our experiences as far as like the rides and the restaurants. Well, no, this trip report was basically just about all the new guidelines that you have to go forth surrounding the attractions and restaurants and everything. But I will have to say, when Disney said that you would feel safe at Disney than any other place in the world, instead of like at a Publix or a Walmart or a Target, honestly, they weren't kidding. That wasn't a lie. Because the protocols that Disney has to keep everyone safe, to keep everybody healthy, and just to kind of keep bigger companies, so to speak, I'll use that term, than to actually pinpoint certain people off their backs. It actually it works out really well. And just even with the protocols, like for instance, like the transportation with the buses, I have never seen this at Walt Disney World before. Normally, you're waiting about 30 to 45 minutes per bus, depending on where you're going. At the Magic Kingdom, they had 6 buses lined up ready to just start filling people in, because it was, I think, about 25% capacity per bus. So, and right before you get onto the bus, they actually have the seats numbered.
Wow.
So they actually say, depending on how many people are in your party, they say, okay, you sit in section 3 or you sit in section 4. I actually like that. Yeah, I wish they would keep that even afterwards, because you don't have to worry about a crowded bus, people standing over you and sweating on you and breathing on you. I mean, I didn't like that anyways, but it definitely gave a lot of breathing room. Now, mind you, the lines looked astronomical,
right?
Because of the 6 feet distance and everything. It looked like it would be a 5-hour wait, but I mean, they kept that line moving, that even though that there was a lot of people there at once, it was continuously moving. So people weren't around big crowds for a very long period of time.
Okay. Interesting. Very, very interesting. Now, Dre, I wanted to bring it back to you. Now, you haven't been to Florida since the COVID situation, right?
No, I haven't been to Florida probably since just after 9/11, which is very interesting.
Now, do you have any questions for George? He just got back a few days ago. Do you have any questions for George in regards to the protocols or anything on your mind or that you're curious about in regards to that?
Well, I think the buses, the bus situation is very, very interesting. Disney was actually criticized shortly before all this when they actually their intervals between buses were extended, so to speak, and they were changing this up based on what was going on with the minivans and so forth. So this commitment to, no, we're going to have not just an increase in maybe intervals buses, but we're going to actually have buses on standby to accept all of the guests trying to come in, trying to move them to certain areas. This is the kind of level of commitment that just does not get put out there by anybody. So it's fascinating to hear.
Yeah, definitely. Now, George, I'm assuming you went on attractions as well and everything. What did you notice with the attractions in regards to the COVID safety protocols?
Aside from Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, excuse me, Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run, and there was one more, like Splash Mountain, like things like that. They had whatever wait time was given. That was basically the wait time. So if it said 65 minutes for Splash Mountain, 9 out of 10, it was a 65-minute wait. They basically, for Splash Mountain, they blocked off the entire walking path of Frontierland just for the line for Splash Mountain.
Wow,
that is interesting. Do we know how they're actually calculating the lines? What they used to do is they used to give you a kind of a red ticket.
They don't do that anymore. I think with Walt Disney World, they calculate it by the magic bands themselves, but I think that's still where it's not consistent enough, because there are the rides like Rock and Roller Coaster, Star Tours, even Space Mountain. They said, we got in line for Space Mountain and it said 55 minutes. It was basically a walk-on. It was like 5 minutes.
Interesting. That's significant. Now, did you experience Jungle Cruise by any chance?
Yes, I did. Now, with the Jungle Cruise, that the way that they had it, again, it said 25 minutes, but it was about, like, I'd say a 10-minute process to get from the line to the loading platform. And they do 2 sections per boat. So they take one group of people to the front of the boat, and then they take the other group to the back of the boat, and they have the boat kind of split with dividers. So the second half is not anywhere near the first half, depending on where you're sitting in the boat. So everyone is together, but there's definitely social distance within the boat itself.
Do they still assist you when going on the boats?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
Yeah, they had a person in the front of the boat and a person in the back.
Interesting. So now when you were there, you felt very safe. You didn't feel like you were in any kind of danger.
I felt more safe than me just going right down to my local Walmart, to be honest with you. I really did. It was, to me, I just feel that with Disney, because Disney, for me, they kept everything so clean regardless, especially because I've been on even a Disney cruise.
Right.
And you can't get into the restaurants unless that you sanitize or wash your hands before even going into a restaurant every single time, even when they did the buffet. But even at Disney World, they constantly had cast members wiping down benches, wiping down tables, wiping down chairs, and they had a consistent sort of like a role play thing where not a role play, I'm sorry, like a rolling voice that comes on with the announcement that they say, constantly, wear your face coverings, mouth, nose, social distance, wash your hands. If you sneeze, cough, cover your mouth and nose. I mean, it's constantly throughout the day. So it's like a constant reminder.
Yeah. And
they did have the certain cast members walking around, guiding people, put the mask over your nose. And people were very compliant to it. I mean, there were no irate guests. Everyone followed the protocols. And I think even if there were guests that did, Disney still saved their butts by having their signs up, having the cast members walk around. And it just, as I said, I went to Disney World for a week. I came back. That was the other thing too, with the temperature check. A lot of people think it hinders the process of getting into the park. It literally takes 2 seconds. They have 2 sections sections of like a tented area, 2 cast members per section, so that's 4 altogether. And they're like literally, it's a non-touch temperature check to the forehead, and it literally within seconds you're right through.
How do they handle bag check?
That was the second process. It was the temperature check, then the bag check. They have a non-touch system where you walk through like a metal detector, but it's the kind where you don't have to wait for one person to go through and then walk. It's just a consistent, everyone just walks through. And I believe that they have these screens that are facing security, and they can literally see if there's anything that they need to do bag check. Otherwise, if they don't need to, they don't check your bags.
Yeah, from what I understand, the new system that they've implemented at various areas of the Walt Disney World Resort is a pretty sophisticated one, using artificial intelligence, and it's a pretty neat system. Which, if we were to have any silver lining coming out of all of this, and maybe we talked about permanent procedures afterwards, this would be something that's this is an upgrade.
So for me to just end with my experience at Walt Disney World, I can safely say, from being a person that has been there and experienced it, there is no excuse whatsoever that Disneyland should still be closed right now. I'm sorry, there isn't. Because it's coming from one company that if they're going to implement it at World, they can definitely do it at Land and do it safely. There's no ifs, ands, buts about it.
Right. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, George. I mean, I don't see what the issue is, you know, and Disney has always been, even before COVID, Disney has always been a very controlled environment. You go in, it's private property, you know, and it's basically, you know, no shirt, no shoes, no service kind of a situation. You have to abide by Disney's rules. It's probably a lot safer than a lot of the stuff that people do on a day-to-day basis right now that isn't as controlled. You know what I'm saying?
And part of that announcement, they made it very clearly, and they actually added it to the announcement. It was never there before, but it actually was brand new when we got there. They said, guests that do not comply will be asked to leave.
Wow.
And they've actually posted sandwich boards around, similar to what you would see with Rise of Resistance. What is it? What is it called? What am I looking for? The Rise of the Resistance boarding passes. Not being available. It would be a similar sandwich board system, but just telling you that if you don't actually comply with our mask mandate, you will be asked to leave.
Interesting. And, you know, it's interesting. We're going to kind of segue now into Disneyland. And, you know, I think it was last week, you know, King Newsom, Governor Newsom, I'm sorry, not King, Governor Newsom. My bad.
We'll get back to that.
Yeah. Governor Newsom, you know, visited, or his team visited, you know, Florida to kind of check out the guidelines. And, you know, coming from George firsthand, you know, it sounds like Disney World has their stuff together. They know what they're doing. He came back, and the guidelines from Newsom are just as draconian as they were a month ago. Dre, what are your thoughts on these new guidelines? He went to Walt Disney World to see how Disney could handle the pandemic, and he comes back and just gives us the same guidelines.
Well, this is why you have some executives and some of these proprietors going, well, they came to us, they saw, and honestly, it's very indicative of the experience that George just displayed here. They were actually very impressed with the policies and procedures implemented at these various theme parks and resorts, and not just Disney, but others. They came with their own suggestions, but honestly, they were shocked with how much consideration and time actually went into implementing these policies and procedures, and seeing them firsthand. I mean, they were stunned. And so that's why you had some of these executives go, well, this was all just for show. They weren't really taking any input whatsoever. They were simply going to render their decision that they had dreamt up before this, and nothing has changed. Not one iota. In fact, it's gotten worse in some cases, right. And we'll get into the specifics here. But they did not at all have a dialogue or discussion. They didn't take these teams that we had heard about had been sent. They didn't take any of that into consideration, and they simply forged ahead with untenable guidelines. I mean, there is these business proprietors cannot operate. And just to go into a little bit of this, they are now. We heard this, they were going to do this before, but they are now distinguishing smaller theme parks with larger ones.
Right.
Well, the smaller theme parks, 15,000 guests or below, are going to be subject to different rules. Now, just to give you a little insight into what they might have for some of the bigger theme parks like Disney, like Universal. Let's say the guidelines stipulate 25% capacity or 500 guests, whatever is fewer. What does that mean? Well, if you have let's say we have a theoretical park at that 15,000 a guest number, 500 guests is only 3.3%.
Wow.
Just to give you an idea, that's double Oga's Cantina in terms of guests.
Oh my gosh.
You might as well be closed. This is why Bob Chapek very early on said, no, we're only going to do things where it's going to actually be a profit at all. If it's not profitable, we can't go into this venture. This is not something where, okay, we get to yellow and, maybe we'll get them together. I'm sorry. Even if you get to yellow, even if you get to this completely unreachable goal, which is completely arbitrary and completely made up by the California government, by the way, even if you reach it, the goalposts will move so wide that it will simply be an unprofitable venture going forward.
Now, speaking of what you mentioned about profits, do you think that was why Disney's way of saying, you know what, this is taking too long, let's just lean more towards the streaming service of Disney Plus? Do you think that if Disneyland would have actually opened up sooner, like Walt Disney World, that they wouldn't have to lean more towards the streaming service as like their main backbone for profits?
Probably not. Honestly, that had more to do with the studio side of things than the theme park equation. Now, if you look at the breakdown of the Disney company, I believe almost 50% is just their parks, consumer products, and experiences division. The streaming aspect of it was really because just simply movie theaters were down and they simply couldn't get product out. That's how that goes. It's more about the distribution of that. But honestly, I mean, you raise a good point where they're having to do such extreme measures in part because the Disneyland business is simply down.
Right. Yeah, and I mentioned it in a video where, the layoffs were always going to happen. They were shut down for months. Even Walt Disney World was shut down for months, but they didn't have to be this bad. They're only 28,000 and this significant because California, there's no end in sight. They're not able to open. Now, maybe the layoffs would have been 25,000. Maybe they would have been 20,000, but they still would have been better than what we're dealing with now.
And even Parks Chairman Josh D'Amaro even mentioned in his opening statement, if it would have just solely been from the shutdown, he would have said the shutdown, but he included with the shutdown because of the issues of what's going on in California. So he basically was telling the people without actually saying it that the majority of the number of why it's this number is because majority of it is coming from the California issues with Disneyland not reopening.
And I believe that language was strategically placed for maybe their options going forward, which we'll get into.
Yeah. And one thing I'm really getting tired of, fellas, and I've done a whole video on this, and I'm really tired of hearing about listening to the scientists. Because listen to the scientists makes a great bumper sticker. It's great sloganeering. It sounds great. It's like announcing, I support world peace, right? Who doesn't? But the problem is that that whole slogan assumes that every scientist, every expert has the same opinion. there are a lot of scientists, and I did the video on it a few days ago, that do not agree with these endless lockdowns, who do not think they are beneficial anymore. They think they are causing more damage than good. So which experts, which scientists do we listen to? Do we listen to the ones that Governor Newsom approves us to listen to, which tell us that we need to shut down indefinitely? Or do we listen to the other ones that say that the lockdowns aren't doing that much help in controlling this virus? Which scientists do we listen to? Because if you listen to Governor Newsom, you know, scientists are all of one opinion. And I think that's kind of bunk. I mean, that's kind of baloney, you know?
I remember speaking to actually another guest when we were in line for the Grand Fiesta Tour at Epcot. And she said to me, and she brought up a really good point that I never really focused on it before. She said, I understand the notion of shutting down, but with everything staying shut down and trying to keep us so protected that by the time we go back out into the world, our bodies and immune systems aren't going to be susceptible to anything.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it's been proven. And look, there's been study after study after study after study about the benefits of vitamin D and getting out in the sun, and how it actually is actually proven to show it limits the amount of complications you might have with COVID and what have you. People need to get out of the house. It's not healthy to stay locked up and cooped up, inside all day long. Dre, I'm sorry. What were you going to say, sir?
To speak to that point, I believe a report just came out where over 70% of the United States citizenry were vitamin D deficient. So that's an issue. But theme parks have, consistently displayed that they're one of the more safer venues that you can possibly visit. And for the reasons that you just talk about here with vitamin D, I think it's I think you could make the reasonable argument that it's far better to be at a theme park than many other venues, including theaters, zoos, other things that are open in California specifically. But to speak to your other point, the WHO, the World Health Organization, just recently came out and said, no, we don't advocate for lockdowns as a first measure. Lockdowns are only we only advocate for the use of lockdowns only to reevaluate resources, to get your other strategies in place, and then from there on, you should be implementing those strategies. The use of lockdown as a first measure is completely damaging. I outlined that clearly in my thread, and we've talked about that before. Yeah. But the fallacy of a scientific consensus on this, trust me, folks, there is none. There's a diverging range of opinions going through, and Governor Gavin Newsom cites science, but let's just break it down here. He has a color-coded system. I believe it's yellow, orange, red, purple. They go into percentages: 2% positivity, 4% positivity, 6% positivity, 8% positivity. Well, why isn't it just 3%? Right? Why isn't it just 3, 6, 9, 12? Why isn't it 4, 8, 12, 16? There's no reasoning behind this. These are arbitrary numbers picked out of the air.
Right.
This is a construction by the California government and the California government alone to impose these unbelievably strict mitigation measures that are simply unattainable. And as soon as you do attain them, don't worry, we will move those goalposts further to make it so untenable that you might as well not even try.
Yeah. And isn't that kind of what happened? Like, if I'm not mistaken, didn't they have a different tier system? And then right when Orange County was gonna move on to the next tier, I guess they went on to this color-coded system, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, they had a stage system implemented at first, and then they changed it going forward. Go ahead, George. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I was just going to say, didn't Disney actually even shut down the whole notion of don't even try to even open before the guidelines were even released?
Yes, I do believe that was the case. The idea was we were going to play nice and work with the government of California, not try to usurp them. We're gonna play by the rules that you had set forth. But it's Daddy Newsom setting rules, setting a foundation, setting overarching principles that you follow, and then as soon as you do follow those, as soon as you're successful in those, well, now we'll just change them again, and we will go ahead and shut you down further. We'll just move the goalposts. We will move where you should be, and so we can just keep going in perpetuity. Back before the summer spike that California had, briefly, there was a stage system, and they changed that to this blueprint, he calls it, this color-coded system that is far harsher than just about any place in the nation.
You know, here's my situation. Like, I hear a lot, and I'm sure you guys on social media have heard this too, that, you know what, if only those Orange County residents would have followed the mask mandate, or they would have listened, then we wouldn't be in this predicament. If only they listened, if only they didn't do the anti-mask marches and what have you, then Disneyland would be open and everything would be fine. Here's my take on that. If masks work, if masks prevent the spread, if masks are effective, it should have no bearing on Disneyland reopening, because Disney is mandating the mask to get into the park. So if you're saying that masks work and they prevent the spread and it's an effective tool, then open up the park. They're mandating the mask. It doesn't matter what OC residents do.
That was my whole point. They're automatically seeing what Walt Disney World is doing. So even Newsom didn't even have to do that trip down to Disney World.
Right.
It's there. Go on the computer and look up Disney's protocols to even get into the park.
Right.
I mean, if they're going to do it at Walt Disney World, they're going to do it at Disneyland. So they're saying, you know, social distance, mask, wash your hands, cover your mouth and nose when you sneeze or cough. Automatically, if Disney is implementing those procedures, then, yeah, as you said, there's nothing to worry about, because they won't even let you through one turnstile unless you follow those guidelines. Otherwise, you will be asked to leave.
Right.
It's really just a horrific argument that you can, and really it just shifts the burden. It shifts the burden from the government to the people. Oh, well, if you just wore your mask, if you just listen to directions, this could all be solved. This goes away. Just listen to us, and you'll be fine. It's so ridiculous. Understand, in several states, theme parks are open, have been open, no issues. This is an unreasonable standard, arbitrarily set by the California government to prevent you from experiencing a theme park, and to prevent all of these businesses from the surrounding businesses, the employees that work at these businesses and the theme parks from going back to work. It's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense that you're going to just shift the burden to a certain populace, to a certain demographic, that we have complete control of the metric, the standards used, hold that against you and say, well, if you want this back, just follow our orders.
Yeah. Well, and if I'm not mistaken, and fellas, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't LA County in purple right now, if I'm not mistaken? Yes. Okay, and Orange County's in red, right?
Yes.
Okay, so Orange County didn't follow the rules, but they're somehow doing better than LA County that did?
And that's just it. When you look at the positives and the positivity rate, they don't go into any of the nuance associated with it. They don't actually talk about who is actually being positive, whether positive cases are separated from positive tests. They don't go into, like I said, the population. So if you, and I believe Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, these were his words, if you carpet bomb a campus with tests, then the positivity is going to be much different than if you were to test what we would deem as a at-risk population, the normal representation of a given area. And again, if you have positives, depending on who they are, then how does that affect your hospitalization or your hospital capacity? There is no nuance associated with any of these policies that they've implemented. It's just, okay, well, if we have a over 2% positivity rate, well, then you're in another tier. So I guess I guess you're not getting Disneyland back. I'm sorry. It's just follow the rules. Just follow the rules. Be good little boys and girls, and you'll get your Disneyland back.
Yeah, exactly. And you know who I really feel bad for is Universal, because they're in LA County, and good luck getting from purple to yellow.
Well, and I think that goes along with why they just announced, we're going to have food and beverage in the park and not actually have attractions, which makes no sense whatsoever. But we will get into that.
Yeah, definitely. Now we're going to move on now. Next topic, we're going to talk about the legal options. Now this is going to get good. This is going to get really good. The legal options that Disney and other theme parks have in regards to kind of, I don't want to say retaliate, but I guess to fight back against these, unfair guidelines. Dre, I want to start with you. Legal recourse. What are your thoughts on this? What can Disney and Universal and all these companies do in regards to this?
Well, this is quite an interesting issue. I had suspected that Disney had a contingency which included a legal option. And the reason I suspected this is a couple of reasons. One, the direct language included in Josh Niemeier's statement, actually putting the onus on California in part for their decisions to lay off as many as they did. And the public opinion. So we just looking at case law, it appears to me that judges are very much swayed by public opinion. And it was very interesting how just after the guidelines were rumored, you started to see a slew of articles from a lot of big names come out and make Disney's case for them in the court of public opinion. And to shift the public dialogue from, shift it from Disneyland open equals death to, no, this has far more wide-reaching implications, and it's not as black and white as it appears. And saying if Florida can be open, then Disneyland can be open. It's an obvious argument, but this is what they were going through on a national scale, not just limited to California as we had previously seen. So it suggested to me, they're really, if this doesn't work out in their favor, they might be going the legal option. Now there is a case going on right now, and I believe it's Gallagher et al. Versus Newsom. And what they are saying is they're going into it and saying, look, California is simply being unreasonable with their lockdown provisions and the emergency powers as absorbed by Newsom. And they argue it from more of an elections perspective. But okay. I wanted to read you Gallagher, who is involved in this case, and what they had proceedings yesterday in terms of what the governor's position on when it came to emergency powers as collected during this time. And I just wanted to read you an excerpt, and I wanted to get your guys' reaction to it. So
okay.
Gallagher tweeted, "Was shocking to hear that the governor's attorneys argue that in an emergency, all power of the state is vested in the governor alone, including lawmaking powers, arguing that we cease to be a representative republic with three branches, executive, legislative, and judicial. Further, they argued that during an emergency, his decisions cannot be, quote, second-guessed by anyone, including the legislature and the courts. Therefore, they said his decisions to change, and they say election laws, overnight without the legislature was right simply because he made it. Wow. Imagine the implications of what the governor is arguing was true. He can make law, and you have no right to influence that decision. You can send him a letter, maybe petition him like a king, but his decision is final and cannot be questioned. Imagine the implications for civil liberties of such a system. Our history is filled with instances of human rights abuses when one man is given unlimited powers of the government." He goes on, but he believes he is king. He believes that what I am doing is right. I can unilaterally have the authority over my subjects, being the 40 million in California currently. And by executive decree, I'm going to set mandates and provisions for the entire citizenry of California to follow. And if you like it, too bad.
Wow. Yeah. And, I joked earlier about King Newsom, but really wasn't too far off.
That is exactly it. Folks, if you remember in Revenge of the Sith, Star Wars Episode 3, when Chancellor Palpatine uses the emergency powers granted to him to declare that the Republic be destroyed and be usurped by the Empire and declare himself Emperor, that is essentially what we're seeing. So if this feels off to you, it should, because it is.
Yeah, and it definitely given off Star Wars vibes. I mean, even that whole thing with Anakin, his quest to prevent, people from dying. No one wants anyone to die, obviously. I don't want anyone to die in a car accident, but I'm not going to sit here and advocate to ban cars because it'll bring the death rate down from car accidents down to 0. We still need to function as a society. And this whole notion of just shut everything down, lock it down, stay in your home, don't communicate with anybody, because then we'll prevent anyone from dying is kind of ridiculous. And it's extremely authoritarian.
It's an extremely ridiculous standard. It is the definition of authoritarianism or even tyranny. And don't worry, we are doing this for your best interests to keep you safe. George, what do you have to say on it?
For me, yeah, I'm with you guys on that all the way. And I kind of get a little disgruntled when someone also says, oh, well, this will all go away. This will all go back to normal once a vaccine comes on. What I don't understand is if you look at the notion of a vaccine right now, there are many different factors of a flu vaccine. There's a different one each year depending on which strain comes out. There are people who get the flu vaccine. There are people who do not. The flu is still there, regardless if you are one who gets a flu vaccine or you don't. There's actually people that are compromised if they get the flu vaccine. There's people that aren't. I'm one that if I actually get the flu vaccine, I'm down for 3 weeks. I am completely out of commission. I'm more better off without it. My wife and son, it works for them. So when a person says, oh, everything will start going back to normal with a vaccine, COVID is out there. It is now in our existence, and it's not going to go poof like the fairy godmother goes bibbidi bobbidi boo, and it's gone. So, I mean, as far as that goes, but as far as with the legal status, I mean, a group of people already did a protest, a peaceful protest right outside of Disneyland. What was it, several days ago, I believe?
Yes, I believe it was Saturday. Okay.
So that is already stirring the notion, not even just for Disneyland, but for everyone that passed on Catella and Harbor Boulevard and even those businesses. I mean, Disneyland and the city of Anaheim were never on good terms as far as getting stuff done within that proximity. But I think with all those businesses now, they are really starting to see that without Disneyland, their businesses are suffering. They're absolutely – no one is going to go on Harbor Boulevard to grab a Big Mac or just to grab a Big Mac.
Right.
So, what were you going to say, Vash?
Oh, well, yes. I was just going to give people context to the reason why George is bringing up a vaccine is because that's one of the standards by which Governor Newsom is actually operating on, that when a vaccine is actually imminent or when it actually gets distributed, then things go back to normal. He's actually said this. Now, recently, in collaboration with Governor Cuomo of New York, at the same time, they're wanting to implement a task force that will independently review a vaccine once it gets approved by the FDA. Understand, folks, he has now controlled the issue, the potential ways to fight it, and the potential solution to such issue. Unilateral and full control. Again, this is quite disturbing, and if you have any ideas that maybe a vaccine be implemented and maybe they go down to yellow, well, then that puts a kink in that chain as well. Also, there have been some the Orange County, I believe, health official just recently came out and said to get to yellow, even with a vaccine, at the earliest, you're getting to yellow in Orange County with Disneyland open, whatever restrictions are past then, to about, I believe it was early summer. That's as early summer 2021. That's as early as, even with the vaccine, that they can get to there. And without any impositions put out until then. That's as soon as it can come. So really the legal option is the only option available. If people want to get back to work for Disney, if these businesses want to restore their businesses with Disney being open, and for us to even visit Disneyland, that is the soonest we can get to it. And I'll go into it a little bit of maybe precedent a little bit later.
But yeah, I agree. I think honestly, it came down to there's no other options. There really isn't. There's no even sitting down for a board meeting and saying, okay, well, let's compromise. Let's do. That's gone. That ship has sailed. There's nothing. And I think Disney has been more than patient enough to wait and see and wait it out and try to figure something out. I mean, Iger even left Newsom's board, and he didn't even shed a tear.
Yeah, the legal option is the only way. I mean, and I think they're like, I think from what I'm understanding, and Vash, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was Cedar Fair who pursued legal actions against Ohio in regards to a similar situation. Is that correct?
Yes, they are. Yes, they did pursue Ohio over that scenario. I don't actually know what the outcome of that was, but they were allowed to open. But yes, they did pursue the legal route when it came to Ohio specifically. Apparently, the Ohio governor he also believes that the daddy government should be able to run your life during this time period. So that did happen as well.
So hopefully Disneyland, we get, if they do pursue legal action, hopefully we get a similar outcome where they are eventually able to open. Maybe the legal action will be enough to put a fire under Newsom's behind to get him to be like, all right, you know what? Okay, fine. We'll negotiate something a little more reasonable.
I've been looking at Newsom right now with his status. I don't even think it's going to be, okay, well, if you don't do this, we're going to do this. I think literally it will happen when the actual lawsuit or what have you is actually in place. And I think that's going to have to come from the Disney themselves. It's going to have to come from over almost the 30,000 cast members that got affected by this, and just the residents of people of California in general. And I think everyone is just going to have to band together from separate entities into one that are just going to come after Newsom to where he's kind of backed in a corner, so to speak.
But essentially, yes, this will have to be a mixture of public opinion and legal recourse. And on that front, I think this is why Iger might have been silent. I suspect that he might have had instincts where this might have been going the legal route. And again, whatever you say, I can and will be used against you. I think he wanted to take a more neutral position when it came to all this, because maybe the legal route was being pursued even at that time. What's likely to happen is a class action. So they have I believe it's like the California Theme Parks Association, or what was that group called that they're working with right now? Eric Guerrero is a part of it.
Oh yeah. Is it? Oh, it's CASA, I think, or something to that effect.
It's something. It's essentially it's the consortium of theme parks that operate in California. Right. I believe that it's going to be a class action lawsuit emanating from that entity, representing all the theme parks being affected, and that would include the smaller ones as well, because those stipulations or restrictions simply are untenable as well. But we have some legal precedent for this. Unfortunately, there are no overarching Supreme Court decisions on this. Usually, when it comes to the Supreme Court level, these governors are citing Jacobson versus Massachusetts, which is pretty much almost 100 years old now, but that's what gives the executive position unique powers in terms of an emergency. It's bad case law if you go into it, if you want to go into that specifically. But I believe when it comes to Michigan, Governor Whitmer's orders over there were struck down in the Michigan Supreme Court. Apparently, they have an emergency power provision which only gives the governor there 45 days in order for the executive powers over there, and then it must be reapplied. Apparently, that wasn't followed. They struck that down. That could be cited potentially. There was a Pennsylvania decision. I believe it was Butler versus Wolf.
Yes.
Which was the Pennsylvania.
I'm from Pennsylvania, so yeah, Butler, from the very beginning, like when they were starting to open up into the different phases of like yellow, Butler was one that wasn't even looked upon, and they went for Governor Wolf.
Right, and there was a dissent. There was a decision that was in a lower court, but it was Judge Stickman, which wrote a pretty indicting decision, honestly, in his opinion brief. I did cite that in my thread, actually, because it was quite interesting. And what the notion was, well, look, you have non-essential businesses cited. You didn't actually come up with a definition of non-essential businesses, and you ran with that. You arbitrarily applied standards to, maybe in the case of the Butler v. Wolf decision, you applied standards to have large retail chain operations open, like Walmart and Target, selling the same exact thing as some of the other businesses there. This speaks to the arbitrariness of maybe smaller theme parks to larger theme parks that they might be able to cite. And it just, I mean, if you read his Stickman's opinions on it, I mean, it goes into all of this in great detail. And I won't get into it too much here, but you can cite the arbitrariness of some of the Governor Newsom's decision making on this, and then you have the essentially the Supreme Court decision ruling in the favor of the casinos in Las Vegas, and over the religious gatherings that are there. So they can cite that. Apparently, Gorsuch wrote a decision saying we have essentially placed Caesar's Palace over Calvary Chapel. Well, if that's the case, then theme parks are definitely allowed to open, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
there are some legal bits that you can go through. MiceChat has a good post about this, about maybe what the legal options could be. They cite provisions in, I believe, let me just see here. They believe they have a lawyer speaking on this, and it says any legal action by Disney or other theme parks would challenge the constitutionality of the governor's guidelines. Business challenges to the lockdowns typically rely upon the provisions in the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, as well as sometimes the 5th Amendment. First, when a law attempts to treat similarly situated businesses differently, the 14th Amendment's Equal Protections Clause requires that the law have at least a rational basis for the different treatment. Second, the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause prevents the enforcement of a law if it's so standardless as to invite arbitrary enforcement. The Fifth Amendment's Takings Clause prevents private property from being seized without just compensation. Again, when you close down a business, you're essentially seizing that business for yourself. Well, that should have due process attached to that. But specifically the 14th, the equal clause, you're saying that small theme parks should be treated differently than larger theme parks. What is your basis for this? Because if the operational standards of smaller theme parks should apply to larger theme parks equally, right, no matter how large they be. You have zoos, museums, home theaters, not home theaters, but theaters open that are malls, indoor malls open that are far more dangerous, at least according to the science, when it comes to COVID-19. And you're treating, which, by the way, theme parks are they're just a collective of all those things. And you're treating this differently. Why? Knott's Berry Farm, Universal. They're going to go forward with the process of having the theme parks open for food and retail, but you can't go on attractions, even though the CDC has specifically said that attractions are low risk as long as theme park attendants don't actually help you get into the restraint system.
Well,
That's
it's crazy.
That's what Dave from Fresh Baked was saying, that you're going to open the actual area up, but who really knows to say, oh, me going on a roller coaster is going to make me contract COVID?
Well,
like, what does that data have to even go from to even, because if you really think about it, Disneyland is an outdoor area unless you are physically actually going into a building.
right.
Each building, and I actually think Orange Grove, you covered this on one of your videos, that when you were saying that each, depending on what building you're going into, they should have the specific guidelines because you're actually entering in a building. But when you are outside, you still keep that physical distance. But if you're going to enter a theme park, whether it's just for a festival or what have you, you're going into that park one way or the other. Going on a ride is not going to depict whether or not you're going to get COVID or not.
Well, yeah, and Dre, you mentioned an interesting point where you said it shouldn't matter whether you're a small park or a large park, and I completely agree. And it could, primarily because if you're going to restrict capacity, if Disneyland isn't going to allow the full capacity anyway, what does it matter if you're a small or large theme park if you're only allowing a certain amount of people in at a time anyway, right? I mean, doesn't that just...
Exactly. This is these arbitrary notions. And just so you folks understand, even one of the provisions in these theme park guidelines is that only outdoor parks open. I'm sorry, only outdoor attractions be open. So for Disneyland, that's devastating. I mean, yeah. I'm counting it up, and I can count on two hands how many attractions are from start to finish outside completely. So that is also another restrictive tier that you have to factor into this. Even if Disneyland does get open, will all attractions be available? Apparently, according to the governor's guidelines, no. So they're being arbitrarily targeted based on their size, which makes no difference. And again, you can account for that with restrictions, 25% capacity limits, hard numbers, which they've already set for smaller theme parks in the course of 500 or less.
Yeah.
You can account for all of this, and it simply makes no sense. And I had friends in California tell me, hey, look, I go to a mall and it's a free-for-all. I go to a grocery store, it's a free-for-all. There is no oh, well, let's go ahead and check in and make sure that we don't have as many people. Okay, now you can come. That's all gone away in large part in various areas of California. So this makes absolutely no sense. This has no basis in either science or data. You cannot point to any science that lends credence to, oh, I am more predisposed to getting COVID on a roller coaster. There is none of that exists. None whatsoever.
Let me ask you, Dre, because you just said that their guidelines are saying if it's an outdoor. Now, when you say an outdoor, are they proclaiming that? Because a lot of even attractions that you have to still go into a queue building, but then eventually goes outside. So does that mean the whole entire attraction, even for the loading, would have to be outside?
The way I'm reading the guidelines is that it must be an outdoor attraction like a roller coaster that you would find at like a Six Flags or even various parts of a Knott's Berry Farm, where as long as the from stem to stern, when you actually get into the queue to when you actually get out, as long as you're outside the entire time, it sounds like those are the attractions that are allowed to open. Which, by the way, how many of those attractions exist in the entire Disneyland Resort? Not many.
Not many. Pixar Pier and maybe a handful in Fantasyland. That's about it.
Honestly, that's about it. I don't even know if Big Thunder Mountain Railroad would apply.
Right.
Right.
That's how strict this is.
And that's what I was actually getting at, because even though it's an outdoor attraction, but in order to get into that outdoor attraction, you have to still enter through a quote unquote indoor queue line.
Yeah, you have a themed building to which you have to, just prior to load that you have to pass through. Can you actually pass through that? I'm not sure. Now, a compromise could have been established where you have the bulk of the line completely outside, and then for the internal portions of any given attraction, you mitigate how many people actually clump up in those areas and so forth. So similar to like an Indiana Jones, for example, a more extreme version, but the bulk of the line is completely outside. You let in so many as to actually load ride vehicles and so forth. This does not have a provision like that whatsoever. Unless I'm missing something, that is not part of these guidelines.
Well, and even with Walt Disney World, I mean, you have a lot of attractions, you have a lot of things to do. So even right now, everything at Disney World is not fully open. None of the shows are, none of the nighttime shows, none of the fireworks, none of the parades, although we have like the character cavalcades. But I mean, you still have enough to do, where with Disneyland, you guys are already on the short end of the stick as far as room and capacity goes to begin with. So to then open the resort back up with a certain capacity of people, with already, like if you were to do the math and you would already have a short capacity of people, but you only have X amount of attractions open, you're already looking into a disaster of having crowded people anyway, because you want to have enough open to then spread those crowds out. If you're only going in there with 5 rides open, but you're going to go in with 25% capacity of people, and everyone are going to go towards those 5 rides, you're going to be bottlenecked.
Yeah, it's counterproductive.
That actual point was actually made in the Stickman decision regarding big box stores. It's like, well, wait a minute, because you differentiate between big box and small, even though they sold the same products, and so forth, you didn't disperse people. You actually congregated people even more because you limited where they could actually go to these big box chains. So you did what is the opposite of what your intention was. And I fear that's what's going on. I think George makes a good point. What's going on in theme parks? If you're limiting where people can go, if you're limiting the choices or options they have available, well, now you're just going to get more congregation in places that you didn't originally envision. From what I understand, that same phenomenon is playing out with Knott's Berry Farm. People are saying, whoa, it feels busier than it ever has before. And it's like, yeah, well, of course it would, because you've taken out more things for people to do, limiting choice and getting more congregation.
Well, Dre, it's funny, and this is kind of a little bit off topic, but it does touch upon what you were talking about. I went to the mall last week, our local mall, right, which are now allowed to be open. And a lot of the stores, and me and my girlfriend were talking about this, it made no sense. A lot of stores that you would usually have like maybe 2 or 3 entrances into the store, right?
Yes.
They were blocking off like 2 of the 3 entrances and forcing people to go through one entrance. Right. And I turned to my girlfriend and I'm like, why are they doing this? Why are you forcing people to go through one door? Isn't that counterproductive to the whole social distancing thing? The Gap, Macy's, they all did it. I don't understand it. Why are you forcing people to go through one entrance? That makes no sense.
No, there was one notion at Walt Disney World, sort of like the story that you just said, that I understood what they were trying to do, but at the same time, I didn't really understand it, and that was with the mobile ordering. More specifically at the hotels and those indoor restaurants that they're not actually letting people in, but you can go in once your order is ready, where a lot of people are hanging around those areas. And again, it's causing more of where people are around there, where it would just be best just to open it up and say, even with the mobile ordering, just come in and get your food.
Right.
Yeah, and that's why these hard and fast, very generalized solutions aren't usually, they take none of that into account. And that's why Disney is usually pretty good about evaluating how their policies and procedures are put in place, whether COVID or otherwise, and adjusting those things on the fly. With such strict guidelines, attempting to take into account every single nuance is completely impossible. So you do get those kinds of disparities between ingress, egress traffic, like you mentioned there, and other things that have been brought up so far. You cannot take all these things into account. Yeah. So the government attempting to do it themselves is just it's not only untenable, but it's not even reality.
Yeah.
But the smart thing that Disney did was they actually had someone come out and tell people, you don't have to stand here and wait for your order. It's sort of like a fast pass, where once you get that notification, you come back and then you get your order. And I think once that was announced to the people, then they were starting to get the idea that I can place the order. If they were to go to just say Pico's Bill in Frontierland, they could actually be in Fantasyland, place the order, and they didn't have to arrive to Frontierland until their order was ready.
Yeah, and that just goes into Disney's dedication and attempting to make this situation work for the largest variety of guests. You know, it's interesting. We just heard recently that they're going to be adding plexiglass to the ride vehicles of Rise of the Resistance to try to get more capacity out that way. I mean, they really are attempting to adjust and make it as facilitate as much guests as possible while still keeping up to their high standards with regards to safety. You have to give them credit. They are evaluating, they are changing, they are taking this into account, and it's really been phenomenal from that standpoint, at least out in Florida.
Now, I want to conclude with both of your thoughts on going forward, and I'll start with you, Dre. But what are your thoughts on, what are your predictions as to how this is going to pan out in Anaheim? And what I mean by that is are we going to have to wait till the yellow tier? Is any legal action going to work and they'll be successful? What are your feelings? What are your predictions in regards to moving forward with Disneyland? How do you think this is going to pan out?
Here's my feelings and predictions on that front. I believe the Gallagher, the judge has not rendered a decision on that front as of yet. Apparently a decision is imminent. So we'll see if that does go forward the way that Gallagher wants. Then the executive powers you can wave bye-bye to the executive powers of Gavin Newsom. And then I believe the company will take, they'll go forward with the reopening from that point on, safely, responsibly, all those kinds of things. But if the judge doesn't render a decision that gets rid of these powers that the governor holds, and maybe it gets thrown up to another court upon appeal, you would then see a class action lawsuit filed, I think.
Okay.
If this lawsuit doesn't go their way, they will litigate themselves, and I believe that will be coming right when that decision is actually applied to the Gallagher case. But past that, listen, I don't think the proprietors are going to be waiting to yellow. Even if you get there, this doesn't go away. This isn't like, oh, we're going to have just the Florida operation brought to California. That's not what they're saying. I believe the legal route is the only way to go. Governor Gavin Newsom's been clear. He's going to be stubborn. He's not going to talk. He's not going to have a dialogue with any of these establishments, with any of the proprietors, with any of the businesses, with any of even the local leaders like the mayors of these cities involved. So the legal option, it becomes imminent at this point.
Yeah, and that's upsetting because it's easy to be stubborn when you're a millionaire and don't have to worry about your rent check, But what about all the cast members that depend on that park being open for their livelihood? And
exactly.
It's upsetting. It really is. George, what are your feelings? What do you think the path forward is? What's your predictions?
Kind of going off what Dre was saying, I completely agree. I think Disney is now in the position that they're going to have to take legal action going forth if it doesn't at least have a notion of an opening plan where it's like, okay, by this date, we're going to be able to open. I think that's when Disney can then kind of take a breath and, start to say, okay, let's start getting everything. Because they're already, there were people taking pictures of Disneyland where they were getting everything already prepped and prepared.
Yeah.
That the glass was going up, the distant markers were being in place, everything was being wiped down. Disney was ready to open on July 17th. That was their initial opening date. So if they were ready to open then, that should automatically already tell the state of California they're way well prepared to open, and there really shouldn't be a problem. And Disney has all that info behind them, not to mention the cast members that lost their jobs, the city of Anaheim with all those businesses, because I know for a fact they'll probably back Disney up because their businesses are suffering. All those hotels on Harbor and Catella. And then even to the notion of, I know I'm kind of going a little bit further, that the D23 Expo was officially announced for 2022. So Disney is kind of already kind of throwing those hints at people to say, no matter what, we are going to be open. Yeah. Because in order to have the expo, you're going to have all those hotels running that business. And a lot of people make those trips with a Disneyland trip in mind with the expo. So it's like Disney's already throwing those little hints and digs that we are going to be opening soon. We have a plan. I think Disney kind of already has a plan of legally of what steps to take on taking on Newsom, to be honest with you. I just think they're just waiting for the appropriate time of kind of vanquishing all their other options. And then I really think it's going to turn into a class action. Do I think it's going to open in 2020? Absolutely not. I think the year 2020 is completely shot for Disneyland, but I think Disney has this notion of a new year, a new slate. This is when we're going to start it.
I would agree with that as well. Even if they were to get the clearance by the government of California or otherwise, it would still be 4 weeks worth of training, calling people back. I would agree that 2020 is basically shot. Just the chances of it being open in the year 2020 is a beyond long shot. If you consider the lawsuits to be filed as long shots themselves, but moreover, just to finalize my point here, Gavin Newsom originally said immediately, very soon, very very soon, put out these promises, put out these misrepresentations of what was actually going on,
right?
And now we've seen that just is not the case. And I truly believe that that Disneyland was trying to play nice with the state, trying to play nice with the governor, and saying, okay, we will trust you, and that you want us to be open, and that you'll be working with us. As soon as the guidelines originally were published, that did not include theme parks. That was the red flag. That was when really legal recourse should have been maybe considered at that point. It was clear from that point on that they were being unnecessarily targeted. And it's really unfortunate with how things have gone on. I don't think Disney wanted to do this, but they're going to do it.
They're going to do it. And it's really interesting how the tone from the governor has changed. Because if you remember back in March, he kind of gave Disney carte blanche. He said, hey, you know what? We're banning gatherings over 500 people or something, but Disney can make their own decision. And fast forward now to September, October, and it's a completely different tone. I don't know what's happening. We know more about the virus now than we did back in March, so I don't understand where the governor is coming from. I think it seems awfully fishy. It seems awfully weird to me.
I think, but when he said that, though, Iger was still part, and I still think where he may have known something on the inside. I don't know. I'm not saying like it's like a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
I think maybe Iger knew something that wasn't actually being announced to Disney at that time.
Yeah.
For me, that's when I started seeing that when Iger stepped down from Newsom and kind of like turned his back from him, that was where it was like the first initial kind of punch back from Disney.
Yeah.
I think you guys make a good point, and you just reminded me of something. I do concur, George, that something and Orange Grove, I do believe with both of you that something did radically, fundamentally change. The governor's stance certainly changed, and we can all speculate as to why that would be, but obviously Iger stepping down from the Economic Recovery Task Force lends credence to that. But if you read Governor Gavin Newsom's statements, just his philosophy on government, he has made statements in the past saying, government should work with you, not against you, that, there should be it should be a more simpatico relationship between the two, that government should really step out of the way and manage issues that are that the state's succumbing to, all this kind of talk. And that simply has not been representative with the timeline of events as they've transpired. It's simply antithetical to his previous core philosophy or beliefs or even his statements prior to him becoming governor, as lieutenant governor, and so forth. So something fundamentally changed. I'm not sure what. We can speculate all day and night, but something did radically change. And Disney's position, I think, has changed with it.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting. We have an interesting few months ahead of us, fellas. It's going to be pretty wild.
And I think it's not going to be pretty. I think it's going to take some time, but I think Disney can pull it off, but they have a rocky road ahead of them, and especially for the recovery for all those cast members to literally bring them all back. Whoever is even going to be available to come back.
Right.
Try to find new people to fill those positions and just get that resort up and running again. It's going to take some elbow grease, to say the least.
It's absolutely tragic, and I've always argued on behalf of from the cast member standpoint and the small businesses that are affected by this. I've always argued from their position because they are so vital to what make these theme parks amazing. Go ahead.
Yeah, and not to be alarmist or anything, but unfortunately, due to the current circumstances and the unknown factor, the layoffs, at least at Disneyland Resort, are far from over. Far from over.
Oh yeah, they actually even announced that. They said this was just the tip of the iceberg. That's going to get even beyond.
This is simply the first round of layoffs. It's abundantly clear more layoffs are coming. So for the folks who are saying, well, the lower rung cast members get the short end of the stick, no. From what I understand, I was just looking at the person's post who has some insiders himself, and he was saying that the team that was working on the Avengers e-ticket that was coming to the Avengers campus in Disney California Adventure, they have been laid off.
Wow.
So it's coming, folks. You're gonna. This is gonna be painful. It's gonna hurt.
When I saw 411 Imagineers get laid off, I mean, those were ones that I thought part of the Disney that they wouldn't even been touched. So when you see 411 Imagineers being laid off, I mean, I don't know what their positions were as part of being Imagineers. They could have been architects. They could have been, part of the Blue Sky process or what have you. But I mean, just the notion of hearing 411 Imagineers laid off from 401 Flower Street, that's just mind-blowing.
It's irrevocable damage that will be profound. I mean, the culture within the halls of Imagineering on the executive level regarding theme parks and theme parks themselves will be forever affected and changed by this. This is devastating. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, guys. It's bleak.
And even with like producing more things for the theme parks, Disney likes to have things like every couple years, but I think they're like going to be so far behind that we're not going to see anything new except for the things that have already been announced. It's not going to be for like another 5 to 10 year process after all that is said and done.
Investment into the Disneyland Resort area, especially, is pretty much on hold.
Wow. Yeah, I would agree with you. I think outside of Runaway Railway, which is already going up, and Avengers Campus, which is way too far along to cancel at this point.
Absolutely.
I think the rest of the stuff is really a big question mark, and including the Splash Mountain re-theme. I mean, people say, oh, no, that's going to happen for sure. But if you think about it, that was announced, like a couple months ago. Well, it's they don't have the money to do it, obviously, right now. And I just don't see the sense of urgency to pour money into that right now. And it's going to be probably at least a few years to even start on it, in my opinion.
Avengers Campus was already so far along, like you said. Not going to stop that. Fortunately, the development dollars for making Minis Runaway Railway have already been spent. And in terms of materials, they're coming to the site now, so that's pretty much in the can. But yes, I mean, capital expenditures going forward, regardless of resort, really, are going to be heavily affected, and that's going to be predominant at Disneyland. From what I understand, Walt Disney World's version of the Splash Mountain re-theme is still on the books, but Disneyland specifically, it's very interesting. That one was very much up in the air. So even that, I think you make a good point. Even that is It doesn't look good.
It doesn't
And
look good.
I think it was very ironic that right before all this happened with Disney Plus, that they released, one day at Disney where they're celebrating all their cast members and their contributions to the company, and then it's like, here comes the new year, and it was like
The hammer.
everything of that documentary and that docu-series, it was like kind of put in vain, so to speak, because unfortunately, I mean, Disney's hands are tied right now. But I mean, it's just an unfortunate event that they created that series for Disney Plus, and then this occurs.
It will be history in the can of the era before this, certainly.
Yeah. It's pretty wild, fellas. I'm certain that the resort will survive, but I think that we're gonna have a drought, so to speak, in terms of investments, like Dre mentioned, for the next few years at least. It's going to be very, very interesting. But I do want to thank both of you. I've had both of you on many, many times, but never together. It was a lot of fun today, and I appreciate both of you coming on. And before we close out, George, go ahead and remind everyone where they can find you on social media, and then I'll move on to Dre.
Absolutely. Again, my name is George. You could find me on YouTube at DisneyFamilyMan23, also on Twitter at DisneyGeorge. And you could also listen out for me. I'm part of a podcast called the Grand Circle Tour Podcast. You can listen to us on iTunes and also on YouTube.
Thank you, George. And Dre, if you can please let the good people at home know where they can find you, sir.
I'm Dre. The best way to reach me is my Twitter handle, at VashSky. That's at V as in Victor, ASHSKY. Best way to reach me, and I'll definitely reach out. And I'm welcome to talk to whoever. So there you go.
Perfect. Well, thank you, fellas, both for coming on today, and thank you all for watching. Comment below, like, subscribe, and as always, have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye-bye now.